Hello and welcome to another edition of Pulp Picks. My name is Patrick.
I'm Fritz.
And we're here to give you this week's reading recommendations on New Comic Book Day. And it's kind of a lighter week again, post-holidays. It's kind of typical for January. But we have a highly anticipated new number one in a very hot wing of the comics universe. So let's get right to it. What did you pick today, Fritz?
Yeah, so my pick isn't that pick. Don't worry, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
But it is New Gods issue 2. Unsurprising if you saw our previous video with this series on where we both just could not say enough good about it. But yeah, this issue, if you couldn't guess, a good chunk of it now involves Mr. Miracle and Barda having to deal with the kind of, I don't know if you want to say burden, but like, Orion just kind of showed up last issue and just like, hey, I've been tasked with this. I don't really want to do it, but I gotta. So it's kind of your problem now too. It's just like, and then just kind of like the brother thing to do of just like, hey, I'm going to make my problem your problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, so we get some more on that. We get to like learn a bit more about this kind of like new god that appeared, like new god that has appeared on Earth, and kind of the players involved with dealing with that. And there's some surprising faces that show up, like some that you don't normally associate with the new gods and some that you do, but in like ways you probably don't expect them to.
Yeah.
Which is going to be very interesting for a lot of reasons, like considering some of these characters, like the groups that they're involved with and outside of this story might not look too like favorably on what they're doing here.
Yeah, and we get a little more backstory into the prey, I guess you could say. The quarry? No, what am I saying? The quarry? No. What?
I don't know. You kind of
yeah,
the new guy. Yeah, like
yeah. Well, the one that Orion has been tasked to get.
Yeah, like we start to. It's one of those things where like we're learning more, but at the same time, it's just creating like new questions.
Yeah. Well, and so then you also get into, are we being misled in order to try to get a particular outcome?
Yeah.
You know, we as the reader, but then also, you know.
Yeah, and then on top of all that, there's then a wholly new player that we get introduced to in like the opening pages. They've got another little guest artist doing, which I love that they've got Cagle doing like the main story, and then like each issue has like a guest artist kind of doing like the little intro sequence, and their whole thing, I love how they are simultaneously like portrayed as being like very laid back, but also like clearly a threat that's going to, like, especially by the end of this issue, you start to kind of like get a grasp of just like, oh, this is going to be a problem now.
Yeah, so they're like super powerful, influential leader of armies, but they see themselves as a scavenger. Like, you know, they just kind of see it as like, I'm a janitor, I clean up.
Yeah.
It's my job. I just do my job.
Yeah, it's a very interesting juxtaposition, and we know like in the next couple of issues, like things are going to heat up a lot with whatever their whole deal is. So you've got all these different like plates spinning, all of which kind of portend like the end of the new god in some shape or form.
Yep.
And it's just going to be kind of a matter of like, well, how's that all going to play out? Like it's...
Yeah, basically, like they're saying you can't have the alpha without the omega.
Yeah.
So since the omega is gone,
something either has to like take its place or something has to happen to the alpha.
There's a balancing that naturally will occur.
Yeah.
And this army that is now moving in across the galaxy or universe or whatever
like,
is part of that process.
Yeah. And part of the thing is, though, we're not entirely sure, like, what... Because, like, these guys seem to view both, like, the gods of Apocalypse and New Genesis, like, as more or less being the same. Like, they don't really distinguish between, like, good or bad, per se.
Right, yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see, like...
They're connected to the source. They gotta go.
Yeah, so very curious to see what they do with that. Again, Cagle's art is, like, absolutely gorgeous. There's a couple, like, pages where it's, like, Highfather having these, like, nightmares of what might be coming, and they're like hauntingly beautiful in terms of like the destruction that's being wrought. But also just like the little character moments. There's a great bit with when like Big Barda first kind of like really enters the scene that we were both like chuckling about right before this.
Yes, and he does such a good job of kind of I don't know, like modifying his style for different scenes that I was thinking there were 3 artists on this book. So yeah, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. You know, it's one of those the plot thickens kind of issues. You get a lot of foreshadowing, and it's feeling very foreboding at this point in time. It's, you know, it's the continuation of the beginning of the hero's journey is what we're seeing here. And like often happens in that situation when the hero's getting ready to go off and do it alone, he gets surprised and is joined by others who are willing to go with him and think that he's dumb for trying to do it alone. I loved it. You know, I mean, it's classic storytelling, but it was done really well. And the combination of the art and everything. And this cover's gorgeous.
Everything about this book just continues to, like, be magnificent. Like, I mentioned that for issue 1, just on its own, is contender for being, like, my favorite issue of something last year. Yeah. This probably already is contender for being my favorite series, just ongoing of this year in general. Sure. Like, I don't know. I can't say enough good stuff about it. Love this book entirely. But it's not the only number 2 up here.
Yeah, so, and number 1 got picked also.
Yes.
So I went with Laura Kinney, Wolverine, number 2. And the cover certainly gives you the impression that she's thrown down with Elektra, who's also Daredevil now. Because they've both been drawn, well, they're both in New York checking something out, and they have very different ideas about how to approach the situation. So basically there's like a shady deal going down, and Laura wants to just jump right in and slash everybody. And Elektra wants to be, you know, a little more thoughtful about how to go about doing it and kind of see how it plays out so that they can get more information. So yeah, this one continues to be really good, and I like how it's got kind of that X-House style kind of art, but it really lended very, very well to Elektra and what's been happening over in the Daredevil wing for, oh gosh, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now?
Something like that.
Yeah, with the kind of ribbony, swirly, flowy hair stuff going on, and the flowy scarf thing that she's got going on and whatever. It just adds such a cool dimension to everything, and kind of a sense of motion and volume. And it just ended up being really cool. There's a great car chase scene where, you know, of course, if you've got a Wolverine, you put them through the paces, right? You run over them with a car, you shoot them, you do all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, it was really good. And the ending is you know, there's a lot of buildup, and then we get kind of this explosive cliffhanger, and it ends up being really good. So I'm very pleased with the pacing on this so far, because you're getting enough of the backstory, and you're getting enough interaction between the different characters to make it feel grounded and everything, but everything's moving rapidly too. So you feel like, you know, it's kind of a high-paced action book.
It's not like, you can probably name like half a dozen books where it's just like, it feels like it takes like half a dozen issues to feel like you've gotten anywhere. Whereas this is just like, things are like moving along, but at the same time, you're not getting whiplash. Like it feels like you're going at like the right pace.
Right, yeah. It's kind of like, you know, like those 70s action spy thriller kind of things, where it's like you're getting enough of the story and the dialogue and everything, because they're willing to take a little time to do that. But the action is actually driving the story forward, as opposed to...
It's not just a set piece that happens to happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Just because it's like, oh, well, our pacing is a little slow right now, so let's just throw in some action, and it's not really driving the story. So it's really well balanced. I'm very much enjoying this book. Yeah, still plenty of time to jump in on it because it's so early in the series. I highly recommend, especially for any of you Wolverine or X fans or Daredevil fans, for this particular arc, because it looks like they're going to be together for a bit. But all right, well, speaking of Wolverines...
to a shock to no one, since we've mentioned it several times coming up to this, but Ultimate Wolverine issue 1 drops this week.
Yeah, and if this sells out and you didn't get a copy, you've got and you've been watching the video, you've got nobody but yourself to blame, because we've been saying it for weeks.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, I knew because this was the big thing that Marvel kind of showed up at New York. Like, this was their kind of like big title that they talked about, and you get why, because it's a very like Wolverine is obviously one of Marvel's biggest characters for like decades now.
Yeah.
And also this new Ultimate Universe has been like their big thing for the last year. So it's kind of a no-brainer, like, oh, Ultimate Wolverine having his own title. And it's so cool how similarly with all the other Ultimate books where they take like the things that you kind of like know and expect about like a Wolverine book and like do it in a way that's still like very much its own thing and like very unique while still like keeping the core of Wolverine in there. Like this is very much a Wolverine that kind of like is like most like base animalistic like weapon form. Like like this is very much a Weapon X Wolverine.
Yeah, it's like just after he breaks out of the Weapon X program, you know, unsure of who he is, where he is. He's just angry and alone and trying to figure things out and doing terrible things.
Yeah, and like, but still like take all that, but still being like honed by like very nefarious forces. Like this, like I don't know if this is like a spoiler alert or not. They've been very clear about this in the solicits. Like he's also like this universe's Winter Soldier. Like he is like this like highly coveted asset that I can't remember exactly what they're called, but like the Russian like Federation group that that like Colossus and his people run for the Maker. Like he is like kind of like their secret weapon that they throw into like high stress danger zones. And you get why, because boy howdy does he make mincemeat of everything he runs into in this issue.
Yes, and so very similar to the Weapon X program, they've upgraded him and wiped his mind and whatever.
There's a little hint about like how that happens in here that I'm very curious to see where they go with that.
Yeah, and they don't really hold your hand as they're kind of jumping around timeline-wise, so just know going into it that you're kind of jumping from one timeline to the next. Yeah, it's really good because it feels so much like Logan, right? Like it's just the situation's a little different, but very, very similar. And you know, you also know that there will be a point where he figures out exactly who he used to be and what he has done in the interim. Very much like Logan, but also like the Winter Soldier. So it's a very cool combination to do it that way. Yeah.
And one of the things that was a big selling point for me for the book when they first announced it is, as sad as I was to see him leave Moon Knight, they've got, let me make sure I got the name correct here. Alessandro Cappuccino, I think is what it is. Yeah. What we've been saying anyway. Yeah. We're probably wrong, who knows. But their art has been one of the big things that's made Moon Knight the last couple of years like an amazing title. And they absolutely are able to bring that over to this book and like really make this kind of like haunting, dark like world. Just like full of like shadows and blood and violence. And it fits so perfectly.
We get a glimpse of the adamantium skeleton, and it's horrifying and well done and very cool. And then also kind of like how they're doing the Winter Soldier process. Also, very Clockwork Orange and creepy.
Like that whole sequence. Chris Condon is the writer. Absolutely. Like they've mostly done more like indie stuff and like Image and that, but like recently between this, they're the current writer on Green Arrow right now. They've been really kind of making a mark for themselves in terms of like the more like big two books.
Well, this is a massive title. So yeah, this is and well deserved because it was really well done. And going back to the art for just a second, you know, a lot of familiar faces that are obviously different universe versions of them, but they look great.
I love there's an interaction where like one character's like trying to like fool Wolverine and then like quickly realizes like, oh, this ain't gonna work.
Bad idea.
Bad idea. Which I love how much character they're able to get across with him, despite the fact that like he doesn't really like talk at all in here.
No,
like,
not at all.
Like it's very much if you remember from like the Winter Soldier movie, like Bucky just being this like very silent, like merciless killing machine for most of it. Like that's very much the vibe they're going for here, where it's just like this is like an engine of destruction that you just drop into a place when you want everything dead.
Yeah, but you put a muzzle on it just in case. Yeah, exactly.
Like they're like clearly even his like handlers aren't like super sure if they can like trust that he's like going to stay on the leash.
Mm-hmm.
Which it'll be interesting to see what happens when maybe that does happen.
Yep. So, as I was reading this, I couldn't help but think like, man, this might be one of the few bright spots, not right at this particular moment in time, but if things go a particular way with this Wolverine, what an asset to the Resistance he would be.
Yeah.
Because, he is just merciless.
And that's another thing, because like this title also establishes that there is this like kind of like mutant-based like underground resistance force against like the Colossus and his forces. So between like that now being established, you've got the Ultimates being their whole thing, all the mutant unrest going on in Japan and Ultimate X-Men, the whole war between Wakanda and the rest of like the African forces arrayed around Moon Knight and Ra, all that kind of stuff. Like they're definitely heading towards like a big conclusion sometime this year, and however it starts to play out is going to be very interesting.
It continues to just be so good and so interesting. Highly recommend. All right, well, what was close to making it up to the table here this week?
Let's see. Other good stuff this week. Space Ghost almost made it up here. It's the part 2 of a two-parter where... One of the things I like about this book is that it's been pretty much all just kind of like one-off issues, but here and there they'll have like a two-parter that's like kind of a more like, here's a big threat. This one's been about kind of like the big looming threat throughout the series has been Metalis. And last issue you got to see like why he's the big threat. And then this issue is kind of like, okay, how do we actually win against this?
Sure.
And the way it all plays out is super cool. I love how Jan and Jace really like feel like they're like they're not just like, oh, Space Ghost just happens to have some kid sidekicks. Like they actually like are important and do stuff that like really help save the day here, and Blip for that matter. So that was super cool. But that was good. Other stuff like Nightwing and Exceptional X-Men were also both really fun. What about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I'm still really enjoying the Batman and Robin series with Mark Waid and Chris Samnee. It's kind of fun to see Batman, at the beginning of his time with Robin kind of stripped down and whatever. But this issue got dark, and I really liked it. Challengers of the Unknown, Christopher Cantwell on that one. I probably would not pick it up if it weren't an author that I cared about, that I've really enjoyed their work. But Cantwell is crushing it on the book. And I'm thinking it's tying, we were talking about this before. There's a lot of things that, are kind of loosely connected in DC right now. And it's going to be interesting to see what parts actually are tied in and how that's all going to come together and what that culminates into. So, very good. G.I. Joe continues to be exceptional too. Lots of good stuff this week. So, all right. Well, this is the point where we say be sure to like, follow, subscribe, share, comment, and get on into your local comic shop. Hopefully it's Pulp, but if it isn't, go support your local comic shop. We, of course, will be back next week because every Wednesday there's new comic books. So every Wednesday we make all efforts to be here, having read a whole bunch of stuff so that we can make, well-informed recommendations for you. But we'd also love to hear your well-informed recommendations, so leave some comments for us. And we will be back next week with a new video. Until then, enjoy the reading.
That's right, we're coming for you.
Yeah.
No one is safe on Pulp Picks.
Yeah.